Um, the original point here was that we have two pretty cool commercials that Schema Records ended up getting this music into. One was a commercial which you can see without the music if I pull it up here. This is commercial for Joe Boxer underwear. The story really doesn't work the same when we can't use games now. So we talk about music. The original point was that we got this music into two different videos, one of which was for boxer shorts and the other one was a Honda Acura commercial. And I will allow you to go to those later. You've got the links in the agenda here. There's also, since we're not going to have volume today for whatever reason, there's a nice thing here on Boolean search operators that's going to be useful for you when you're doing your searches to find information for the managerial execution and corporate responsibility measures sections. And then finally, there's a nice video here on the importance of corporate responsibility and the impact that companies can make in sort of making the world a better place. And that is also available for you, but you can't hear it until I fix the damn audio problems, so I'm not going to go through those right now. The punchline here, money-wise, is basically that if you do all of the calculations here, we basically ended up having a total of $200,000 in revenues here, and 50, 60, 70, 80, and like if we add up all the costs, there's basically $95,000 in costs. So that's not bad. It's like a 55% profit margin. That was fun, like while it lasted. Here we've got $100,000 in revenues, so less revenues, but the total costs were 10, 20, 30, 40, 45,000. So we actually have the same profit margin, with half the costs. So the moving to this model like freed up a bunch of costs, and like not only did it free up costs, like we wouldn't have gotten this revenue anymore anyway because no one was willing to pay for CDs anymore. So this number kept shrinking, and this number kept shrinking, which would have made the profit margin worse and worse and worse. It was exactly what it did. Like this goes down and down and down. This number goes down along with that, but basically the 5K and the 10K, we couldn't change very much. Those are sort of costs per album produced. And then the marketing and the systems and admin costs stayed the same as well. So the profit margin kept getting worse and worse and worse here. And eventually most of the business switched to this model. And it's not just advertisers, there's a number of other ways. And we do still make money off selling music direct to consumers. It's just we chopped out that cost and do it directly via MP3 now. And the revenues are not 200,000, they're more like 10, you know? Like there's just not that many people that pay for music. Some people do, but if you look at the amount of money coming in, it's like a micro fraction of what it used to be. So anyway, that in a nutshell is what I want you to do for business model. And for most of you, these columns are going to pretty much be the same because you're comparing two companies in the same industry. Does that make sense? Okay, moving on. Like giving a bit of a big picture before going into the lecture on the next two tools. Everything that we do the next 3 weeks in the analysis tools is pretty much about like deciding what the strategy should be. Everything that we're talking about today and the things that you're analyzing in the company about managerial analysis tools are about how do you actually execute the strategy as opposed to what are the elements of what it should be. So from your textbook, there's actually 8 different areas that are all important to managerial execution. I used to have folks fill out tables with all 8. It's a lot of work, both for me to grade and for you to do, so I've chopped it down to something a little bit smaller so that we have less things to do and we can spend more time on making the stuff that you guys do the best quality possible. So this is everything. I'll get into the example again at the tail end, but just talking a little bit from the textbook side of things and from the eventual like importance for your quizzes. Like organization's a bit of a misnomer. When we talk about like organization, an organization is made up of people, and like the most important thing here to consider is that you want to find people that can make things happen. You want to find employees that have drive, have initiative, have the talent necessary, and you want to get out of the way and empower them to do their jobs rather than like micromanaging them. So you could end up finding people from within. You may end up hiring people that have the right skill sets from outside, but the whole point here is how do you find people with the right talent, and then how do you empower them to do their job and get out of the way, so that as a manager your job is basically to inspire people and to solve the problems that no one else can solve so that they can do their jobs better. But if you're not hiring people who on their own initiative can do the job without having you tell them what to do, then you're not really hiring the right way. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do to sort of find the best quality people. These slides are like I've moved on increasingly from like lecturing sort of big picture to just going to what I want you guys to do in the tool, because at the end of the day, when you leave this class, the thing that remains is the case analysis that you've produced and the LinkedIn profile that you've put together. That goes with you to whatever job you do next. Some of the other stuff is nice to have, but you may or may not remember or use it on a day-to-day basis. But if I can leave all of this for you to read and focus on the red with a couple of like personal examples from my own experience. Like Market Driver was my second company, the small business that I had where we basically did lead generation. We would make a bunch of cold calls on the phone, send out emails, so forth and so on, and find people who were willing to talk to our customers. So our customers would pay us a flat fee. We'd go out, talk to a bunch of strangers, and find new customers for our customers. And the biggest problem with that business was that I did it based on the fact that I could make these phone calls. But there's only so much time in the day, and the amount of money I was charging, was not enough. A, it was not enough to pay me to do it full time, and B, it was not enough to hire somebody who was competent to do it, to have them do it full time. So the biggest reason that business didn't work is because I didn't base it on being able to find the right quality talent. I ended up I used the temp service, and I went through like almost 20 different temps in the course of 3 months trying to find somebody who could make the phone calls and make the connection. I mean, I found a couple people that were comfortable making the calls, but the problem is I'm basically paying 10 to 15 bucks an hour, which is fine, and that was a couple years ago, so it's a little above minimum wage. But I'm not going to get somebody who has 20 years of sales experience at that price. I would have to be charging the customers, to get the kind of talent I needed to be paying more like $40 to $50 an hour, and have a fair amount of that guaranteed, so that I get somebody who has the quality of sales experience that I need, and I didn't do it. So, like, the main thing that was important about that company was realizing from the outset, I need somebody who has this level of talent, and that means they're going to cost 50 bucks an hour. And it's going to take them, I don't know, let's say 20 hours per project to get the work done. So that's, what, $1,000 right there? Am I right? Yeah. 50 bucks times 20 hours is 1,000 bucks. So if I want to make if I want to make a profit on this, I need to be charging like at least 2 probably, because I've got all my overhead costs and stuff to cover as well. So, I started out, when I first started this business, I was doing it thinking I could do this, and I was kind of surprised when somebody said yes at first, so I didn't quite know what price to charge. So off the top of my head, I was like, okay, well, maybe, how about 500 bucks for 20 leads? And that was great. And until I realized that 20 leads would probably take 20 hours worth of a $50 an hour person's time. So I just charged the customer $500 for something that I'm going to have to pay the labor $1,000 to do, which is a great way to like go further and further and further in debt. So it's really important to have in mind the kind of talent that you need. Go out and find it, and build the pricing, build the planning for resources needed at the company around the type of talent you need. Another example, when I worked at Price Waterhouse, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers, that's a huge company as opposed to a small one, and all of these things listed here. So the very first thing about careful screening of applicants, I learned that in spades with Market Driver. I mean, I could tell right away if somebody's going to be comfortable and have the right mindset to be able to do the job or not. And first things first, you need to choose the right kind of people. After that, investing in training, providing sort of challenging things to do, trying to make sure that you retain high performers and compensating them appropriately. Price Waterhouse was a great example of that. They constantly would pay for me to go to continuing ed. They would, I had a mentor that I would meet with like once every month or two and talk about, where can I improve my skills? And there's a lot of patting on the head that went on too. It was a fantastic environment. That's the only job I ever had where I worked for somebody else, where I liked it and I didn't want to leave. And all of these things made it that way. If the company hadn't invested in training, provided challenging things to do, gave me different types of projects to work on, hadn't had a mentor and a coach to help me improve as a professional, I wouldn't have been that happy there. So those are all very important. Resources needed. This is actually, so the first one is actually going to be in your template. The second one is not going to be in your template, but it is in your quiz, and it is something important. It's really important to think about how you invest the money you have in the company. So any company, whether it's a multi-billion-dollar world global corporation or a small 10-person company, you always have more things that you could spend money on than you have money to spend. So you're going to notice over the course of the Globus game, in an ideal world, you'd spend lots and lots of money on the best quality camera possible, and you'd spend lots of money on advertising, and you'd spend lots of money on like worker training and R&D. But if you spend money on all those things at the same time, you end up killing your credit rating, and you kill your profit margin. You have to make decisions about what is the most important thing to invest in, and like that. When I worked for Bertelsmann, which was the company in Germany, it's the parent company of BMG, but they own TV stations. They actually own a lot of publishing assets. So Bantam House and Random Doubleday Dell, those big book companies, are actually owned by Bertelsmann. They own a bunch of TV stations in Europe. They used to own BMG, which stood for Bertelsmann Musikgruppe. They sold it to Sony, so they're actually not in the music business anymore. They were when I was with Bertelsmann. But in my opinion, Bertelsmann never actually knew anything about the media business. They still don't. Like, the people, the executives that run that company in Gütersloh really don't have much of a clue about the damn media business. What they do know really well is how to buy things at a low price and sell them at a high price. Like, they are impeccable at picking new businesses to acquire or picking projects to invest in that cost very little, and then as soon as the project is generating a lot of money, they'll sell it. Now, in the meantime, they had no idea why the business made money, because they don't really understand the media business that well. But they're impeccable at picking the right projects and the right to invest in and the right companies to buy, and that's a lot of what resource investment is about. So, not on your case template, is on your quiz an important thing to remember. Policies and procedures. The biggest example I have of this, like, as soon as you start working with more than one or two people, and even when you have your own company, like, you have to have certain like consistency with customers, even though you may not have very many employees internally. But when I think about grading, like, an example of like the importance of policies and procedures is this class. Like, in an ideal world, like, each of you is like an individual case, like, that has your own issues that you face, your own like challenges in managing your time and investing time in your case paper and in conflicts you might have with being here in class. And ideally, I would tailor my grading to each of your individual situations. But if I did that, all I would ever do for like 60 hours a week is grading for this class, and I would never have time to do anything else, because it's just it's like Disney Fantasia with the brooms carrying water. Like, the more you try and like tailor and do things individually with an increasingly large number of people, the more it spirals out of control in terms of the amount of time and energy you have to invest. So doing things like saying, whether you're like, no matter what your excuse is, like, if you're late, it's half the points, and if I'm late, I give you half the points. Like, that makes it easy for me to, like, it helps me to learn people's names, to just like check who's here each time. But then I send the sheet around, and if there's a person who wasn't here when I like looked around, then I make a note. If the name is on the sheet later, then that means that they were late at some point, and I don't have to remember in the middle of the lecture, like, oh wait, this person came in or that person came in, and I don't have to like negotiate back and forth about whether it's fair or not. Like, if I'm late, I give you guys points. If you're late, you get half points. If that really impacts your grade, there's extra credit to do at the end. It makes my job manageable. And the main reason for having policies and procedures in any organization is to make things manageable. I had the same problem when I was running Market Driver, and I had to make individual concessions for each contract. So one customer wanted to be able to sort of throw the leads back if they didn't like them and get new ones, but not pay me anymore for that. Another customer was okay, so I got to the point where I have to have sort of standard clauses in the contract. Otherwise, I end up spending all my time bickering with customers on whether they got exactly what they paid for or not. It's more than anything, the policies and procedures are ways to cut down on the amount of time and energy that you have to invest to manage complex number of people or organizations. Continuous improvement. This is also not in your template, but it's a very important concept for your quizzes and for managing companies in general. In a big company like Price Waterhouse, it was amazing having access to and people who were paid to go out and look at best practices and look at benchmarking against other organizations. That, like, we did a project for the Washington, D.C. Department of Housing and Community Development at one point, where we went in and we got paid to go in and look and see, is this department working efficiently compared to other departments of housing and community development across the country in similar sized cities to DC. And my job for part of that project was to do nothing all day but go through the internet and find examples of what was the budget and what was the number of houses built, the number of new jobs created in every major city in the country. And there's databases that compile this information, and there's people that in a larger organization that you can pay to go and just go find out better ways to do things. And Price Waterhouse was great at that. That's one of the reasons we got paid for projects, is because we had the people and the resources to go out and find better ways of doing things all the time. It's one of the main reasons why I want you guys to develop the skill set of searching for things online, because it's constantly in demand. But the further you progress in management, the less time you have to do it. So as you're starting to get into a certain industry at this point in your careers, a lot of times, if you are able to go out and quickly find useful information, it's a very valuable skill set. You will not have a hard time finding a job. So in the case of Market Driver, if I had somebody, someone in this class that I could have paid $10, $15 an hour to for, maybe 5 hours a week, I didn't have a lot of time, but it's a little extra money, and I would have had people go out, just find new ideas, go into my LinkedIn and find some additional colleagues or contacts of mine to talk to. Look at companies that have nothing to do with lead generation and just go find me a list of 5 interesting ways that company does contracts, and go to academic, go to the university and find a couple of reports for me on some professor's report or some professor's journal article I write these days on how to do better, more efficient hiring practices. It would have been extremely valuable to me to just hire somebody in here, pay you $10 an hour for 5 hours, so that's 50, or maybe 10 hours, so $50, $100 extra. You go in and spend a little bit of time putting together a 2-page bullet point report. Jeremy, I know you don't have time to go search for all this stuff. I put in the time. Here's 5 useful things about how to do hiring better in the future that I was able to find for you. So you've got money to pay for beer for the weekend. I have useful information. So very useful skill set, and it's incredibly important both for large and small companies to constantly be figuring out how could you do things better, how could you do things differently, more efficiently. Systems. This will be on the template part that I want you to fill out. And it's pretty simple. I just want you to go and find out some information about the hardware and software that the companies that you're analyzing in your case analysis are using internally in their company. So I cannot understate how important information systems are in our world today. Like whether it's customer data and tracking that, operational data, information about employees, about your suppliers, financial reporting, like every single one of those is important for a small company. Like when I was running my small businesses, it's important for a ginormous company. Like I think if I go back to Globus a little bit, so first of all, if I talk about the importance of systems from my own experience, like when I worked for Robert Half, which is the parent company of account temps and office team, and I was a headhunter. I would go out and I would like talk to companies. I'd find things that they need to have done that they don't have an employee for right now, and I'd find a consultant that could do it, pay the consultant $40 an hour and bill them at 80. But the reason that we could do that so well, like the reason Robert Half is so good at what they do, is because they have this ginormous customer CRM. Who knows what CRM stands for? Fuji?
Customer resource management.
I usually call it customer relationship management, but yes, customer and management are the important parts of that phrase. It's basically a giant database to keep track of all the information about your customers. Like when I started working at Robert Half, I sat down and they gave me the orientation and everything, and then eventually like I am supposed to go out and pick up the phone, start sending emails, make things happen, and talk to companies. And like there was no company in downtown Los Angeles that somebody from Robert Half had not talked to before. So there was nobody, like there was no call that I had to make where I didn't know the name of the person I was calling for. Basically there was a large logistics company. I'm not allowed to say the name, but a large company that drives trucks around that carry money. Okay? There's a couple companies that do that. I won't say which one it is, but I called and like I have a database. I click on the name of the company and it pulls up a screen here, and it has records like of people that came before me. Like from 2 years ago, there's a note like talk to admin manager. Jim Smith, operations manager, was out for the day. And then there's another note from like 3 years ago, had a meeting at the facility. Jim Smith is in charge of operations. Like Sue Jones is in charge of like HR, and like Madeline Martin is in charge of like sales and marketing. So like those people may have changed over time and they may not have, but I already know like the names of the 3 people that are responsible for stuff, and I know like approximately what time of day at least 2 years ago the ops manager would go out to lunch. So there's a lot of information I already knew before I ever called. And like the more you're able to track information about your customers, the better. It's the reason why Robert Half is so good at what they do, is because there's really no company in the world that they don't already have information on. It's just a question of like picking up that information and doing a good job of listening to what's going on in the company today and finding out what are problems that are actually relevant to solve now. But and then Bertelsmann, one of the things that like was critically important for our operation, we basically were like the German equivalent of Columbia House Records. So back in the day, when people still bought CDs, my job was basically to create compilation CDs, which we would then market via mail order. So we would send like envelopes to people, enter for a chance to win the $100,000 sweepstakes, and we will send you the first 2 CDs in the greatest hits of the 80s collection. And if you don't send them back within a month, we'll bill you for them and we'll send the next 2. That was kind of the spiel that we did. And based on how many people responded to that, there's a certain number of CDs that our warehouse has to send out to people. But like the number like, first of all, before the CDs get sent out, the mailings have to get sent out to everybody so that they can actually respond and enter the drawing. And like, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you put 3 pages of a flyer in a little mailing versus 1 page, it like doubles or triples the cost of the postage. And when you're sending it to like 100,000 people, it adds up. So we would have to enter every single piece of information about what type of paper are we using, what type of ink, how many sheets, what's the weight of those sheets, and then eventually what is, you'd have to sort of put a link in the system. So if this information comes back and you put a field, you populate in the field here, like this customer sent this piece of information back in, you need to have a trigger in the system that says send the CD. So when we first installed SAP at Bertelsmann, the first month of the system, somebody forgot that there needed to be a link between order and send. So the first month we had our normal costs of probably a couple $1 million of costs, and we had exactly 0 revenues because nothing got sent. It seems kind of dumb, stupid, and simple, but like that system's incredibly important. And you'll notice as we start going through Globus more and more, like the fact that this figure changes when you change the price here, and this number changes when you change the advertising. Being able to like quickly analyze that information is critical. And Globus is not necessarily the best at presenting that information. I think part of the challenge of the game is that you have to kind of look for a needle in a haystack sometimes about the data that you're looking for. And it's a good illustration of how reporting could be better if you are running a big company. You actually, theoretically, you want a dashboard with as few like windows as possible, and the windows that you are looking at tell you the information that's really important. So I could go on and on about how important systems are, both the hardware and the software, but that is important enough to me that I want you guys to go out and find out internally in the 2 companies that you're comparing. Tell me something about the hardware they use and something about the software that they use. So that's that. Rewards and incentives will be in, and basically it's about both monetary and non-monetary incentives. So if I go back to my story of Price Waterhouse, compared to salaries these days, I was working there in 1996, and I started out making like 33, and then I was making 42, and I was happy. Like at that time in my life, in 1996, 97, making 40 grand was pretty nice for me. Could have been more, but I was comfortable with that number. So money was okay. Like they would reimburse everything. So every time I had a taxi ride, or like I had to go someplace, or I had to stay overnight because it was too late to come back home and I said to stay in a hotel, they would always reimburse things without any question. And like the stuff I talked about in terms of retaining staff, they told me I did a good job. I mean, it means a lot to just hear from my mentor once a month, like, Jeremy, you're better than you were last month. I'm proud of you. You're going in the right direction. Like that means a hell of a lot. Just not just getting paid, but having somebody that's a lot more senior than me, knowing that they give a damn about where my career is going, and having them tell me on a regular basis, like, you're doing a good job here. This is you need to help. You need to fix this, not because you're bad, but because your goal is to like become a manager in 2 years, and if you don't change this, you're not going to become a manager. So I want to see you do that, and therefore you need to fix this. But the mentoring, the praise, very important for non-monetary. And then I've always thought like you're not gonna be able to hire top quality people in the first place if you don't pay them well, but you're never going to be able to keep them if you don't do all the soft stuff. So if you don't pay well enough, you're never going to get the top people in the first place, but they're never going to stick around. They're eventually going to leave and go somewhere else if you don't give them praise, if you don't like actually give a damn about seeing them achieve their goals and move forward. If you don't do all of the non-monetary things, you're never going to have any stability with your staff. But if you don't pay competitive money, you're never going to get top staff in the first place. So I do want to know a little bit about what the two companies you're studying are doing in terms of both monetary and non-monetary compensation for their employees. And then culture is not in there, but it's a very important thing. It's a very fuzzy term to try and get your hands around, but if you think about the various entrepreneurial ventures I was in, whether it was my own company or like the internet music company I was at in Hamburg, for any of you who have worked in really small businesses, you may have found the same thing. It's kind of a like us against the world mentality. Everybody within the company is like super, super tight, and we're all like on the same team, and we're fighting against like the whole rest of the world because we're a small business trying to make it. Like that is a very different culture than Price Waterhouse, which is basically 150,000 people all over the world. But it's the whole point. Like Price Waterhouse is a consulting company, so they make their money by being able to sell consultants on projects. So if they don't have really talented staff, they don't have competitive product to sell. So this culture was all about like mentoring and getting paid well and doing challenging projects, and it was all about like hard, fun work and getting paid really well for it and having people that like were my bosses that cared about me. That's the feeling that I got about Price Waterhouse. Bertelsmann, like it's the whole company I think is a bit different than the part of Bertelsmann I was in, but the part of Bertelsmann I was in, the sort of German equivalent of Columbia House Records, had been around since the 1940s, late 1940s, early 1950s. So right after World War II, like one of the founders of the company had just gone around all over Germany and started a book club, because at that time, like the Nazis had just gotten done burning books for 20 years. There weren't a lot of books around in Germany, and everything else that was around had gotten bombed out. So it was very appealing to have a book club because there weren't any good quality books around. But in some ways, the same way that Reinhard Mohn built the business like 40 years before was still the way they were doing things in 2000 or 50 years ago. So, if heaven forbid we should want to try to do like a download instead of a CD, like we don't do downloads here. There's no box to check. There's no box for download. If there's no box to check for download, why are you even like mentioning the word download? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, there's no box to check for download. That was the culture at Bertelsmann. It was very much like, if there's not a box to check, we can't do it. And Sony was, honestly, Sony is owned obviously by Sony. Sony Music is owned by like Sony, the like mega company in Japan. And I think in a lot of ways Sony Electronics bought Sony Music so that they would never get burned again like they did with Betamax. Does anybody in here, like it's kind of before everyone's time, but does anybody know the history of Betamax? So Betamax was an alternative technology to VHS in videotapes before DVDs. And like the two systems were proprietary, they're incompatible. You could either have a VHS machine, which was made by all of Sony's competitors, or you could have a Betamax machine, which is the Sony version. And basically, nobody made movies on Betamax. Everybody made them on VHS. So nobody bought Sony's like movie playback machines because there was no movies to watch on them, and they were really burned by that. So I think they bought music. It used to be Columbia Records. So it didn't used to be called Sony Music. Like Columbia, Arista, like there's a bunch of labels that are under Sony Music that used to be different. They used to be just music companies, and Sony bought them all. And I think that they keep the music division simply because they want to make sure that there's never not music to play on Sony consumer electronics equipment. And they don't really care if the music division makes money or not. like, they just want to make sure that there's always music available to like play on Sony consumer electronics. So Sony, we made decisions in that company that actually were directly counterintuitive to making money. Like, we didn't do things because they were profitable. We did things for political reasons, so that person A or person B could build their empire within the company. It was all about politics every day. It was, you know, who is going to try to like stab you in the back next, and like whose agenda is going to be affected if we try to do this project. It wasn't about profit and loss. It's a totally different culture. And then Robert Half again. Robert Half is a straight up like sweatshop sales culture. Like, you remember, yeah, like I haven't seen the remake of Wall Street, but like the original back in the 80s. Were there like has people in here seen the new Wall Street that came out a couple years ago? Are there still like a bunch of cubicles and like people on phones and like talking all the time? Like that's Robert Half. Like I got there, like I've got a cubicle, I've got a headset and a phone, and all day. Like if the standard is that I make 100 calls a day. Like if I'm making less than 100 phone calls a day, like I don't even have to have somebody come and look over my shoulder, because they're already looking over my shoulder, because we all sit in these open cubicles, and if I'm not making 100 phone calls a day, and if I'm not closing, 5 deals a week, the next week doesn't matter if I closed a great deal like 2 weeks ago. If last week I didn't close the deal, like people are up there at my cubicle like, Jeremy, another week of this and you're out of here, man. Like there's absolutely no security, no loyalty whatsoever. It's what have you done for me lately, and how much have you sold this week? Which makes a lot of money for Robert Half, but I was there for a little over a year, and by the time I left, I was one of the like most senior people in the like building. Like the turnover was almost 100% in a year. So we had like 50 people in that office. The 50 people that were there in the end of 2007 were 50 different people from the people that were there in the like tail end of 2006. It was crazy. A couple people did really well, and those same people are there. But for every one person that was a long timer at Robert Half, there were 2 or 3 that lasted 2 months. So there were some people that I had seen 4 new faces in the same job in a year. Like it's. Like we place bets on like who's the next one to get their throat cut. It's a brutal environment, but you make if you're good at selling and you're able to work the system that they have, you can make a lot of money doing it. So 5 very different kinds of cultures depending on what the company's like. It makes a huge difference in what it's like to work there day by day. It's also kind of hard to research online, so I did not make that part of your template, but for your quiz, for your own sort of learning from this class, incredibly important part of managing the company is what is the vibe there on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, leadership. What I've found at least, and I haven't been in really high leadership positions, but just from the little bit that I've understood from the leadership roles that I've had, like the higher you go up in management, in some ways, the higher you go up in management, the harder your job gets and the more it sucks. Like, your job is no longer to do things. The higher up you go, your job is not to do things. Your job is to solve the problems that nobody else can solve. So, you want to make sure that you're in touch with what's going on. Make sure that you're inspiring your employees to do their jobs. Make sure you're listening to find out, if, for example, like what would be great here, and I'm not criticizing leadership here necessarily, but perhaps an opportunity for leadership at Cal State, which like does not currently seem to be getting done, is to have a regular system for asking people like me, like, what are the recurring problems in this room? Like the fact that like once out of 5 class sessions has everything worked properly with audio visual. That actually shouldn't be my job. Like my job is teaching you guys, not making sure that audio works. But there's currently nobody asking me, what's going on. If somebody were asking centrally on a regular basis, what are the technology problems, and then proactively going out and trying to address those problems, it would make my job a lot easier, and we could spend more time doing more valuable stuff rather than me fiddling around with the audio. So, the higher up you go, the more your job is to ask all of your employees, what are the frustrating things that keep not working? And then your job is to go fix those damn problems. And usually it's no fun to do that, because if it were easy to fix the problem, somebody already would have done it. So the higher you go up in management, the more you end up solving the hard problems, and you don't get to work on any of the fun, easy stuff. And your job is to inspire and motivate other people not to do things anymore. So if we go now to the template again, finally, it's just four rows and 2 columns that I want you to fill out. I'm going to, I'll actually go ahead and jump out and go to the template now. So if we scroll down to the next one here, I've listed for you, this is a reminder of exactly what I want in each of the boxes. And this up here at the top is a reminder of where do you go to find the information. So there's 3 different databases: LexisNexis, ProQuest, and Wilson OmniFile. And if we go back to Blackboard now, the other document for today, WSL Library Databases, has links to these databases. So if we open that up, we'll come back to this first page next week. First Research, Business Source, Premier, and these other industry report things here you're going to use for the external analysis tools. What you're going to use for managerial execution is one of these 3 right here. My personal favorite is ProQuest, but you can use any of the 3. So let me go ahead and open up ProQuest and kind of try to fill this out. So if we go with the same example as before, but we sort of do Sony Music versus Warner Music. This will be a relatively easy search to perform. So you can either click on that link, or just to show you another way to get to the database, if you go to the Cal State webpage, and down here at the bottom you click on Library, and then you're going to click on Articles and Databases, Research Databases, and then you just go down and find the right letter. So in this case it's ProQuest, and that takes you to the same place. So there's a lot of different ways to go about doing a search in ProQuest. I would start simply, if I'm looking, so the first box that I want to fill in is how does Sony recruit, retain, empower staff? So, okay, let's just start by saying Sony and recruiting. Or recruit asterisk. That'll take anything with the base word recruit in it and find it. So let's see what happens if I just search on that. So this has brought back 2,977 results. That's a lot. So I may be lucky if I just browse through the first couple of, basically these are all news articles. If you look here, most of them are like half of all the results are newspaper articles. Then we've got academic papers, so dissertations and theses. Wire feeds are actually, does anybody know what a wire feed is? So basically, Hyder, you know? What's that? A wire feed in news. So basically, most newspapers, most magazines, they don't actually have reporters like in every city, in every state, in every country, all around the world. There's sort of like a couple of people that are responsible for all news coming out of like business in New York. And as soon as there's something new that happened on Wall Street, one of those reporters works for Reuters, one of them works for PR Newswire, one of them works for the AP, and they'll go in and they'll write like a paragraph or two saying, you know, Microsoft just released their fourth quarter earnings report, and this is what it says. And they blast that out, and every newspaper all across the world has access to that. And they basically just copy and paste that into their newspaper, and they put like source AP Newswire. So most newspapers copy and paste a lot of what they write, and the stuff that's actually original content is only the local and the stuff, the editorial stuff. So anyway, wire feeds is here. Trade journals is basically magazines like, Agricultural Week Today or, Petroleum Trends. They're usually like magazines. They're magazines that have to do with a particular industry. Reports are usually come from a company like Mergent, that all they do, or the First Research. So the stuff I was talking about for some of the other stuff for external analysis, they also have news. So everything you see here is from some kind of news story. So if you're lucky, you could just browse through the first couple of results. Recruiting workers. Sony workers forced to switch channels. What does that say? Now a product supervisor with leads was laid off. Hiring Sony workers would be beneficial to his new company. Sony has... Okay, so unfortunately, this is kind of more about another company that's poaching Sony's workers rather than like how Sony does recruiting. So Sony taking even more American look. So you browse through a little bit until you find something that actually has to do with how Sony is recruiting workers for their company. So executives checking ship. So this tells me a little bit about like how like Sony executives in Japan tend to have like a more longer term focus, and they were surprised that executives in the United States jump from company to company so often. So this is not a really good example, but we could use it if we can't find something better. So, if you can't, like we went with Sony and recruit, how about Sony and hiring? Just keep going through until you find something good. Sony hiring 1,000 at Westmoreland plant. Okay, that's interesting. Pittsburgh. So it's a little bit dated, but you can also change that by actually going into the search results and telling it that you only want things after a certain date. But let's just say that we're going to use that one, okay? So The abstract's okay, but this actually tells me a little bit more about the fact that it's in Pittsburgh and so forth. So if I just copy and paste that first sentence there, I don't want everything. So please don't like copy the entire story. It's going to like be too unwieldy. Tell me just enough to tell me something about what Sony was doing to recruit employees. So hiring 500 full-time, 500 seasonal workers to meet booming demand for liquid crystal displays and high quality in its Pittsburgh operations. That's actually not directly in the article, but if you notice like where the article is based, it's talking about a plant in Pittsburgh. So just do that, and then come up here to the address from ProQuest, copy that, and you're going to put the references, insert footnote, and put where you found the information, okay? And that's what you're going to do to fill in each of these 8 boxes. So you would then go and do the same thing for Warner, and then go in, and instead of putting Sony and hiring, perhaps you type in Sony and like Sony operations hardware or Sony operations software. With a company like Sony, it's a little difficult because they're an electronics company. They make like consumer electronics hardware. I don't want to know about hardware Sony makes. I want to know about what they use internally in their own operations. Okay, so if you're doing research on a technology company, you may have to play with the search terms a little bit more than you would otherwise. Software, same thing. If it's a software company, you're going to have a lot of information about it. If you're doing research on Microsoft, you're going to have all kinds of stuff about software that they make. I don't want to know about what they make. I want to know about what people at Microsoft have on their laptops and desktops in order to be able to get their work done and to be able to communicate within the company. So same thing for systems, same thing for rewards and incentives. So you might search on a term like Sony and compensation, or Sony and salary, Sony and incentives, stuff like that. And then leadership. A lot of times if you go to it's actually kind of a if you simply look up, oh, I don't want drive, I want regular. If you just go and you type in Sony music, a lot of times on the right-hand side here in Google, there's other databases you can go to, but you can see here the name of the CEO. Like if you go to Wikipedia for Sony, it should tell you not just the CEO, but also some of the other like major names of people that work in the company. So key people: Doug Morris is CEO, Edgar Berger is a former CEO. Like Clive Davis has been in and out of Sony for a while. Like there's a number of different ways to find the names of key staff in the company. I'll show you some other ways next week. If you just search on the name like Edgar Berger, a lot of times, so if we go back now to ProQuest, yeah. Well, that gives me a bunch of Burger King stuff I don't want. So then, in order to narrow it down to just Edgar Berger, we put that name in quotes. And looks like there's actually some ones that are not the guy from Sony. Yeah, it's not giving me any results. Did I type the name wrong? Bring up another. So let's try Doug Morris instead. According to Google, that's the current CEO. So we go back to ProQuest. Copy. Paste. We'll put it in quotes to make sure we don't get all the Dougs and all the Morrises in the whole world. So that still gives us a lot of results. Maybe not all of them are about the Sony guys. So there. So this tells us some stuff. So that is more about, so this is about when Doug Morris first arrived at the company. This is more about what he's doing as opposed to just the fact that he got hired. So transition from ownership, making a lot of costs of distributing, numbers support him. So it's not the perfect article, but if I were to take this, like, what I want you to do is, you know, I don't want you to like spend half an hour on each of these things. I want you to like spend a reasonable amount of time and then like put lipstick on a pig if you have to, basically. So like we're running out of time in class today, so I'm gonna like go to the lipstick on the pig example right now. But if you had gotten this result, I would want you to go back, do a little bit more searching, maybe search on Doug Morris and like leadership, or maybe go in and just search on like Sony and manager, and like it doesn't have to be the CEO. It could be any like middle manager or VP at Sony. I want to know what some manager is doing to either inspire or lead staff, or what they're doing to solve specific problems. So this is really a report about how Sony's doing as a company, and it's like kind of attributing that to Doug Morris as the CEO, which is not exactly like his responsibility, but and it is not really telling me a whole lot about what he's doing. But if I were to paraphrase this into something that would fit in the boxes, I could say that you know, he's mentioned a lot of things about Spotify, about internet radio. So I could paraphrase this and say, CEO Doug Morris is focusing on promoting Spotify and other internet radio channels as key foci internally within Sony. So I'm kind of paraphrasing what was there, but you know, he's talking about Spotify, and honestly, he could just be saying what the rest of the market is like, but I want this phrased in terms of something he's doing. So if he actually puts his money where his mouth is, then he should be like being a champion within the company every day. So what are we doing to like make it easier to, what are we doing to make it easier to get our music onto Spotify? What are we doing to make sure that back catalog of ours that is not popping up properly in Spotify is like, what are we doing to solve a lot of, like, from being in licensing with that before, a lot of the problem with getting music onto platforms like Spotify is simply that Sony doesn't remember what music they have, and it's all sitting, sometimes it's sitting in a box and it's not even digitalized in a database, and it's just simply a question of going in and fixing some IT systems issues to enable the rest of the content to show up in the right place on the internet. So if he were working on fixing those problems internally, you could kind of assume from the news report that I just saw that that he's doing that, and you would paraphrase it kind of like I did, copy, insert, paste. Now, before you settle on that one, I would prefer that you looked around a little bit more and see if you could find something a little bit better. But don't spend more than a half hour or 40 minutes on each of these boxes. Like, just go in, try a couple different searches, find the best piece of information you can find. If you need to, paraphrase it into the right phrasing for the box here, footnote it and move on. Make sense? Okay, and then make sure to change it from red to black. And in this case, I actually don't want that little yellow in there. So, like, make sure that you take out the little yellow highlighting and stuff too, so it all looks nice and clean. And then eventually, when you were done, you would delete that part too. So eventually, there's just going to be 8 boxes filled with black text and footnotes. Make sense? Okay. Finally, we got one more thing, and we'll call it a day. That's corporate responsibility measures. So, there's sort of an open debate in our society right now, and in a lot of ways, it's mirrored. It's mirrored in sort of right wing and left wing in politics. Like, there's an open debate about the role of corporations in, like, contributing to making society a better place in ways other than just the profits that they create for shareholders. So, like, without getting into these bullet points for 1 second, like, you know, most large corporations, and even small ones, but let me use the example of large corporations. Most large corporations are publicly available, and their stock is traded. So, you know, anybody in this room could go in and buy stock in Microsoft or Warner or Sony or Bank of America or most companies, you know. And then you could simply, like, you know, get the dividend from your stock. So at the end of the year, like, Microsoft offers a, you know, $1 dividend on each share of stock, and you own 100 shares of stock, so you get $1 worth of dividends. So you get $100 total. And you could take that $100 and spend 50 of it on, like, whatever you want, and then maybe donate 50 of it to the American Cancer Society or whatever your favorite charity is, you know? You can do that yourself based on the proceeds that you get from the stock that you own in the company. And there's some people that argue, like, all Microsoft should do is just create profits, and then every individual shareholder can decide whatever they want to do with the donations they make off of that. That's one way to go. However, when a company as large as Microsoft or Google or Bank of America, when that company, like, does something as a company, we're not talking about $10 and $100 and $500 donations. We're talking about million and billion dollar donations. So a company can do things that individual people probably are never going to get around to organizing and doing by themselves. So in some ways, a company can make a lot more impact than an individual person can. There's always a debate as to how much should the company be doing social good, and how much should they be just giving the money back to people and letting the people who own the company decide what to do. So I'm just asking you to sort of do a report card on the companies you're studying, and what are they doing in this regard. So first thing, are they like obeying the law, more or less? Like every company of any size has issues about where they've had lawsuits brought against them, where they've like gotten into trouble. Like just in the news last week is like Volkswagen, and like falsifying the emission standards for their diesel vehicles. Like that. If anybody were doing a study on Volkswagen in this class, you actually talked about perhaps Chevy and VW. That certainly would be a great one for VW. Like just recently got nailed for like falsifying emission standards information. Charities, pretty simple. What are the charities that the company is giving to? And then finally, what's the impact that the company's activities are having on society? I will sort of browse, like go quickly through those and go back to the template here as the last thing before we call it a day. Again, I've put in the boxes here exactly what I want you to search for. And if you simply go out to ProQuest and we type in something like Sony, like let's just type in lawsuit against Sony. There we go. So Hollingsworth, Rothwell, 1.5 billion against Sony. So this is basically, it's a relatively old article again. So, you know, first thing I would want you to do is start here. There's different ways you can go about it, but if you notice here on the left-hand side, there's a number of ways that you can filter the results. So, publication date. Like we can actually move this up so that we only have stuff after 2010. So this is something from just 2 years ago. That's a little more recent. So Research Frontiers looks like SPD Smart Light Control Technology. Yeah, that's good enough. If we just copy and paste that abstract right there, it basically tells what the technology was that, like, basically Sony perhaps used without giving proper, like, royalty payments to the original producers. So we just copy that, come in here, paste, through the format painter so we can actually take out the yellow. And then that's a little long, so why don't we take out developer, let's take out all the rest of that, because really the only one we care about is against Sony and we don't really care where it was for patent infringement. So that is a lot more manageable amount of information. I'd like for this whole chart to fit on one page. Okay, so when you copy and paste, that's great, and it's pretty easy and fast to do, but please don't give me like an entire column with everything you copied and pasted. Just go in, chop out the stuff that's really like tangential, and give me just a nice, concise piece of information. Then go in and footnote it. So again, to do footnotes, you go to references, insert footnote, and you can put that right there. Same thing for corporate citizenship, sustainability. You're just going to go in and alter the search terms so that you find something about the first company you're studying, in the case of the example today, Sony. And then I haven't done the second example, but eventually you're going to go in and do the same thing for the other company you're comparing. And that's it. Those are the 3 tools for management analysis. I want you guys to fill this out for your individual cases by the end of the weekend, this coming weekend. And I had on the agenda, the only thing that we didn't really get to is confirming individual case analysis paper focus companies. I've been sort of deluged with all your guys' emails about your professional development plans, so I haven't gone in over the weekend and looked at the updated spreadsheet. If anybody in here, some of you have emailed me and said, hey, could I do this as my focus, or could I do that? And most of you have said, yeah, I think that sounds great. I don't think there's anything that I've said no to yet. But if anybody is concerned or has a question about what companies you want to focus on, please just come up and see me, or come to my office hours and see me. I won't hold the rest of everybody here for that, but I did want to make sure that anybody that has a question about what companies you want to focus on, make sure to just let me know what your questions are, and I can help you solve them. And other than that, we will talk all about Globus on Wednesday. And there's my sheet.